I think when we talk about hospitality, I don't want it to seem like it's busy work, because it can. Oh, it's one more thing that they told me to do on Sunday. One of the reasons that we emphasize this month is that hospitality is, and I hope you'll see as we go through this morning, is really a core Christian value. Okay, that it's not just a behavior. You know, it's something that is at the core of who God wants us to be, that we be hospitable people. And I think we'll see that. The good news is that unlike in the first century, where being hospitable meant having somebody come and stay at your home for an uncertain, undefined period of time, you can probably get off with a cup of coffee. Okay, so it's not the same thing exactly. In the New Testament or in the Old Testament, one of the reasons hospitality was so important is because Motel 6 didn't exist, and so when you were traveling, you were looking for safe places to stay. And if you were a Christian and you come to a town and there's other Christians, I mean, you could go to the pagan temple and advertise and say, anybody got a safe place for me to stay tonight? Or you could go to the Christians, right? And say, hey, does anybody have a safe place for me to stay? Or maybe I'm not just passing through, maybe I'm in town doing business. And while I'm here, church, is there anywhere that I can stay? And so it was that kind of society where those who were moving needed safety, and those who were traveling. And so the instruction for the church was to, welcome these people. If they're Christians, you're like participating in the building of the kingdom when you do that. So it has changed a little bit. Just a little bit, right, over time, as to what it means when we talk about hospitality today. But I think as we go through, you'll be able to make the connection. The Bible has a lot to say about food and drink. Okay, food and drink. The very first sin, right, involved eating the wrong food. Okay. I mean, there was more to it than that, right? There's what's going on in the heart and the pride and the ambition, but it involved eating the wrong food. And then as you sort of travel through and you start, you're reading Scripture and you come to that book, one of those books of the Bible that's really difficult to read there, Leviticus, and it seems to have just a lot of information that isn't particularly relevant to me. But a good part of that is talking about food. In fact, it's one of the things today that continues to distinguish Jews from everybody else. What food can they eat, and what do they need to avoid? And so you can see on this list, the clean food includes sheep, goats, cows, oxen. They can go hunting for gazelle and deer. They can eat poultry, pigeons. They can eat the eggs of those birds, but not other birds. They can eat fish with scales. And there's some other things as well. But they can't eat. They're told to avoid camel. I know, you're disappointed. Rabbit. Pig. Okay, that means no ribs, right? So it's not just pig, it's ribs. Birds of prey. Vultures, buzzards, ravens. Pelicans and storks. Seagulls. You ever seen a seagull and think that looks good? That looks like dinner tonight. But they weren't allowed to eat it. Shellfish. And when I think of shellfish, I think of clams and oysters. I don't like those. But it includes lobsters. I like those. Shrimp. I like those. So any kind of shellfish, fish that don't have scales. Okay, so the southern U.S. economy is suddenly devastated because there's no catfish that's allowed to be eaten, shark or eel. So this talk about what they can eat, what they can't eat, and it's not. Although some people who know a lot more about nutrition than I do have analyzed these lists, and they've tried to make a case for God protecting his people with healthy food and helping them to avoid unhealthy food and going into all of that. I can't give you any opinion on that. But the purpose, as I understand it, of having the clean and the unclean food is to remind the people of Israel that they worship a clean and a holy God. Okay? That there's a way of approaching God, a way of relating to God that is correct, and another way that is incorrect. So it's about making them think about their life, think about their relationship with God, and what it means to be a child of God, and to do that in a daily way. You might remember, so this list is given to them as they come out of Egypt, escaping Egypt. And where are they headed? Not just the promised land, it's the land that flows with food, right? Flows with food. And so we see it's dangled out there. Never mind a carrot, okay? He's got milk and honey dangling out in front of them as they go towards that promised land. So food is in Scripture. We talked a few weeks ago about the role of sacrifices, and in particular fellowship sacrifices for God's people, and how they represent the people of God, the children of God, having a meal with God. Okay, so that they don't burn their, I always think when I think of a sacrifice, I just think of the whole animal being turned to charcoal. But it's not. It may be a symbolic piece put there, but mostly it's roasted in these fellowship offerings. And then it's eaten as a community with the priests, with God, as a fellowship sacrifice. And you can see on the screen here several examples that we looked at that time of people or of Israel having these sacrifices and eating. It says, in the presence of the Lord your God. Now, we know that God's presence is everywhere, right? So what's that mean when it says in the presence? It means that God's there at the table with them in a particular way. We can go to the book of Psalms, we can go to the book of Proverbs and look at some of the teachings there or ideas about food and our relationship with God. Wisdom has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She's also set her table. And it's like, come, eat of wisdom's table. Better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fattened calf with hatred. Yeah. I know, that's a tough one. Like, could we just say better chicken than ribs, but they went with vegetables with love. Okay, so, and then if you find honey, eat just enough. Very poetic language here. If you eat too much of it, you will vomit. I don't think that's the King James translation, but don't eat too much. Moderate yourself. So there are all sorts of ways that food is talked about in the Bible. In some ways, it's a little unexpected. You come to the Bible thinking you're going to find profound language about all sorts of spiritual topics, and food keeps popping up as you walk through. Even when we get to Jesus, he calls himself the bread of life, right? And if that isn't enough, he also describes himself as being able to provide living water, as we read earlier in John chapter 4. When we consider Jesus' time on earth, an important component of his ministry is recognizing who Jesus ate with. Okay. In fact, who he eats with becomes a significant scandal around his ministry. People were sort of murmuring about that on the edges of the crowd. Can you believe he did this? Can you believe he went to that person's house? If he knows all things, what's he doing in the company of that person? I thought he was holy. He won't be when he leaves there, you know? And so you can see the way these rumors and murmurs, because they had sort of rules, formal or informal rules, as to where one could or could not eat, or who one could or could not eat with. And so whether it be the woman at the well in John chapter 4, and which was our reading, and we'll spend more time in our growth groups with her, or whether it's the sinful friends of Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19. I say it's scandalous because in Luke 7 and verse 34, Jesus repeats, he's aware of these accusations that are made against him. He says, yeah, John came and he didn't eat, and he didn't drink. And you guys were all like, John, what's that about? Come on, let yourself go a little bit. Relax, enjoy life. And he says, now Jesus comes, I come, and I eat and I drink. And he says, and you call me a glutton and a drunkard. Okay? And so he says, you guys are just looking for excuses to criticize people, whatever it is. But the point there is that he knew what people were saying about him. And he didn't seem to, he wasn't really upset that they were saying that. He was more upset at their critical attitude, the hypocrisy between the way they treated John and the way they treat him. But it wasn't that like, oh, you guys are awful because you're saying bad things. Or it's not true. He says, no, I eat with these people. I drink with these people. I think then it's fitting that we remember Jesus each week. How? Over a meal, around a table. And over time, the way that we participate in the Lord's Supper, it's not really a meal, is it? It's a symbolic meal. We've taken what was a meal in the first century and we've turned it into a little cup and cracker. So it's a symbolic meal. But it used to be a whole meal. And during that time, the early Christians would remind each other as they sat around and talked for hours what it was that Christ had done for them. Whether Jesus was feeding a crowd of 5,000 people, or whether he was simply offering the Samaritan woman, the lady at the well, whether he was offering her metaphorical living water, Jesus was constantly demonstrating hospitality towards others. Jesus also, you might remember, when he wanted to demonstrate that he was not a ghost after his resurrection, said, give me some food. He goes up a little while later to the Sea of Galilee and he's going to talk with Peter, but the apostles recognize him because he's cooking over a campfire, cooking breakfast for them. We can think of then how was it that God communicated the broadening of his mission, the broadening of his kingdom to include the Gentiles. He appears to the Apostle Peter in a vision. And he says, see this list back here? He says, I want you to get up and eat them. Eat the ones on the right. Peter says, I can't do that. And then later, It's when he accepts the hospitality of a Gentile, of a Roman centurion. When he goes into the man's house, he says, I shouldn't even be here. When he stays the night, when he eats the food, he says, now I'm understanding that the kingdom of God is bigger than I thought it was. You see, the food communicated something to Peter that it seemed the whole time of following Jesus around hadn't. And so we see these things that are part of our daily life can carry importance to us that we don't always recognize. So I want to just think about this idea of hospitality. As I said at the start, we have our ideas of what hospitality is. And for many years, I think, it's been the having people into your home for Sunday lunch. I know my parents, my mum would, apparently the price of meat was a lot cheaper when I was a kid, and we would have a lamb roast just about every week. And it didn't matter, there were some regulars that would come back to our house every Sunday for lunch. The potatoes were always hollow on the inside because they'd been cooking the whole time we were at church. She was famous for hollow potatoes that just sort of dried up that much. But you put some gravy on it, it's good. And it drove like half an hour or so to get to church from up in the hills every week, and so they would more often than not come and spend Sunday lunch, Sunday afternoon with us before we went back to church in the evening. And then if there were guests or other people, it's the literally putting some more water in the soup and things like that to make it go further. And so that's kind of, I think, the standard that many of us think of when we think of hospitality. A roast dinner, linen napkins, and a sit-down meal in a clean and tidy, spotless house. And so I want to I think Jesus does this, I think God does this, I want us to sort of change the definition or the expectation around the word hospitality. Because we can miss the point. Okay? I recently went to a conference and heard a speaker, and he's written a book called Unreasonable. And he runs a restaurant in New York City, or I think he's sold it now, but he did for many years. And eventually this restaurant came to be number one in the world, the number one restaurant in the world at an awards ceremony. And so his book kind of describes the unreasonable steps that they took to going from wherever they started to all the way to number one. One of the things he talks about is that a lot of restaurants had focused on the food. Okay, get the best chefs, the best ingredients, and have the best food. And if you have the best food, you'll be the best restaurant. Makes sense. He recognized that was really only half of the restaurant experience. The other half of the restaurant experience is at your table. What's your experience like around the food? And so he was not a chef, so he was a front of house guy. He put a lot of energy then into that experience of what's it like to sit at our restaurant. And that is hospitality, right? How can we demonstrate hospitality to people? And how can that separate us, differentiate us from other restaurants in New York City? There's a couple of others there that are really good, so I've heard, right? At least a couple. And he says, how can we stand out, not just from the other restaurants in New York City, how can we stand out from every other restaurant in the world to be the best? And they came up with 2 goals. One, he said, was to be excellent. And the other, I can't remember the exact, excellent and to be friendly. And there's actually a tension between those 2 ideas. Because excellence probably means having your food served within particular time parameters, making sure that everything on the table is spotless, that you have the silverware you need at the right time, that everything's the right temperature, that the staff are where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there. And that's excellence. But it can be very sterile. He said, we want to also be friendly. And so they went through this years of exercise of saying, how can we be friendly and create an experience for our guests? And so, like, for instance, one of the things they did was take away the menus. They said, we're going to take away the menus. And the wait staff are going to have a conversation at the table. And they'll say to the person, now, what do you feel like tonight? Would you like chicken, beef, fish, lobster? And they'll go through, and when the person says what it is that they'd like, they'll go, great. And they'll talk some more, and it's a conversation. At some point, they'll say, the waiter or staff would say something along the lines of, I'm not a big fan of shellfish, or whatever it is. I'm not a big fan of that. Is there anything that you don't like, that we don't want to serve you? What they're trying to do is they say, we want to give people the opportunity to choose what they want, but we also want to give them a surprise. We want to impress them, that they're not just getting the same thing they'll get somewhere else. But when it comes, it's like, oh, that's not what I expected necessarily. And so they're getting these 2 things. But that conversation starts a relationship. He gives this description of how somebody came in and they're in New York City. They'd parked their car and I guess they were asking for change to go back and put in the meter. And one of the waiters, and this is not excellence, this is friendliness, one of the waiters said, oh, don't worry, I'll go do it for you. Just tell me where it is. And so now, whenever, that was the first time, but they realized we can do this for everyone. And now whenever people walk in, they say, oh, how'd you get here tonight? And if they say they drove, they'll say, oh, where'd you park? And when they find out where they park, they'll say, what kind of car do you have? We'll take care of the meter for you, because it's going to be like a 3-hour meal or something. We'll take care of the meter for you while you're enjoying your meal. It's friendliness. And he would say it's unreasonable. It's going above and beyond. But it's not excellence. You see the difference between the 2? And so this restaurant is really focused on making the person seem like they're valued, like they're important, that the restaurant will do whatever they can to make their experience, their night, their time in the restaurant enjoyable. And so hospitality, not just because of this book, but it provides good illustration, but I believe is about making people feel seen and valued. It's not about the food we do or don't give them. It's not about how expensive the coffee shop we go to is or isn't. It's not about whether we ask them to pay, or whether we pay for everyone or we split the bill. It's not about that. It's about making people feel seen and valued. About saying, I would like to get to know you. I'd like to spend some time with you. I'd like to do something with you. I want you to think about Jesus and the woman in the well. Jesus, I would suggest, shows her hospitality. How does he do that? Doesn't give her any food. He doesn't have any, right? The disciples are just going to get it. Doesn't give her any water. In fact, he asks her for water. But he's hospitable because when she leaves, she feels seen, and she feels valued. We might say she feels loved. Okay? And that's what hospitality is. It's an expression of love. These are some of the scriptures that we see that lay this out throughout the New Testament. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers. Okay? For by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Okay? That's a little bit of an incentive there, although you don't know it. And then offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Apparently Christians in the first century could grumble about this as well. Okay, so you're not alone. I want to give us some ideas here for hospitality in action. What's this look like? This is an example I found in an article and by Rebecca McLaughlin, and it's focused on Sunday morning. Right? What does hospitality look like on Sunday morning? And it can be for people who are newcomers to the church, and we get a lot of newcomers to Lawson Road. Okay, maybe not so many today, but we do over the course of a month, or we have a lot of newcomers. But it can also be just people that we are familiar with their faces, and this can apply to. So the first thing that she suggests for hospitality in action is that a person alone in our gatherings is an emergency. Okay? A person alone in our gatherings is an emergency. Okay? People, if we're happy with people being alone in a worship service, coming in, going out, what we're kind of saying is come for the show. Right? Come for the show. The singing's good. Yeah. Preaching won't last too long. We'll get on to the good stuff again after that. All right? You'll hear some Bible reading. They can pray for you. But it's all about what happens. But when we see people who are alone, that's our signal to take action, to get involved with them. And I understand that there are introverts and extroverts, and some people just want to be left alone, you know. But it doesn't mean you grab them by the arm and drag them through the building and then take them out to a restaurant right there and then, you know. I mean, it just means talking with them, introducing yourself, asking where they're from. Maybe even asking what brings them here today if it's a guest. How's their week been? So many ways that you can not just make small talk, but that you can find out things, you can learn, you can show an interest in the person without being too nosy, to let them know that you're interested, you see them, and that you care for them. I like the word emergency. It adds urgency to it, doesn't it? We can't just say, oh, I'll catch that person next week, because there may not be a next week. This one can be hard for us, I think. If that person by themselves is an emergency, then friends can wait. And I know that some of us only see our friends on Sunday morning. Right? That coming together on Sunday morning to see our friends is a good time to catch up, and we enjoy that. We enjoy the conversation. One of the reasons we come to this church is because we like the friends. We like the people that are here. We enjoy the time together. But if there's a person having an emergency, then we can interrupt the conversation and say, hey, I'm sorry, I need to just go over and visit with this person. Because I know that sometimes I've found I'm even talking to one person, they may be a guest, and I see another guest, and by the time that I look around with this conversation, that person that was there has now gone. Okay? And it's, even though I'm downstairs and sort of planted by the door to catch people as they go out, I don't catch everyone. Right? This is a team effort to show hospitality here. And so we all need to be on the same page. That when there's an emergency, friends can wait. And it's not being rude to our friends, because our friends are thinking the same thing, right? They hopefully, and are just getting ready to cut off the conversation they're having to go and deal with the emergency. Introduce newcomers to someone else. This takes it a step further, right? Because it's not all up to you. You see that person by themselves, you go over, you say hi, you interrupt a conversation to let them know that they're important, and then you say, oh, well, that was nice. See you later. Or we can introduce them to someone else. That's inviting them into, not just into the church, but into the circle of friends, saying, hey, I want you to meet this person. I want you to get to know them. They're a good person, you're a good person. You should, I think you'll connect, you'll be interested in each other. Take the risk. I know it's not easy. Right? Some of us are really good at having conversations with people. Some of us are only that way because we've practiced. We've put ourselves into uncomfortable situations. It is risky. It can be risky asking somebody to come to church because they might say no. It can be risky asking people questions because, trying to have that. It can be risky because they may come from a different culture. It can be risky because you may not be able to understand their accent. It can be risky for all sorts of reasons. Usually it's the risk. But it's worth taking the risk to make people feel seen and valued. It's a way of showing God's love, because that's ultimately one way of describing the gospel, isn't it? That God sees and values us. And that's a message that we can share with those around us. So yes, that applies to newcomers coming to Sunday worship, but I'll allow you to extrapolate that to the person whose face I see, whose name I know, or name I don't know. There are people here that I don't know well. How someone's name, can I say that I love them? Right? I worship with them every Sunday for the last year. And I love everybody at my church. But I don't know their name. Now that's if it's a 1,000-person church. That's not Lawson Road. Okay? So how do we... It doesn't just apply to newcomers. This is our month of hospitality. These are people that you might like to spend time with, however you choose to do it. Could be guests. Could be new members. We've had several new members this year. Could be, when I say old, that's not an age limit. It means people that have been here a long time, okay? But you still don't know them well. Could be people that are different from you. You've just have questions you've never been sure you can ask. Different ideas of things you can do. Host at your house. I'm not opposed to that, right? If anybody wants to offer a roast with hollow potatoes and linen napkins, then that's fine, right? Go for it. But it's not the standard. Meet at a coffee shop, treat at a restaurant, invite to a party. If you're having a cookout, just say, hey, there was someone at church. In fact, maybe if you see someone at church, plan to have a cookout and then invite them to it, all in the same time. Play dates at a park, join a growth group, and Sunday lunch is a great time to make connections with people. So I hope our month of hospitality is something that is very practical for us and that allows us to let each other know that we're seen and that we're valued as we spend time with one another. And it's as I said, a very biblical concept because God sees and values each one of us.
Ooh. walking by.